All right, here we go. Everyone, I'm here with Tod Bolsinger. Tod is the executive director of Fuller Seminary's Church Leadership Institute, of which Spiritual Life and Leadership is the podcast. And Tod is also the author of 5 books, including Canoeing the Mountains and Tempered Resilience. Hi, Tod. How are you doing?
Hello, Marcus. Nice to be with you again.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. We're going to talk about some good stuff today, including something very special that is coming on the podcast starting next year, January 2023. So we'll get to that. So everybody stick around until the end, and then we'll have a big reveal or something like that. Anyway, um, here's what I would love for us to talk about today, or just to kind of get us started is. Um, the Church Leadership Institute has been around for about 2 years now, and I've loved getting to be a part of everything that the Church Leadership Institute is doing. And I guess the question I would have to get us started is just what are some of the things that you've learned as you've been working with pastors and churches over the last few years?
Thanks. Yeah, it's one of the best parts about leading this little thing we call the Church Leadership Institute at Fuller is that we get to focus every single day on what is required of leaders in a rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
What kind of leadership is needed and what are the kind of challenges we're facing? And of course, we launched this right before this thing happened that was called a pandemic, and that disrupted everything.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we were in real time learning and studying the very thing that we were trying to bring to the church, which was how do you lead in a rapidly changing, disruptive world? And one of the most interesting things we learned is that the capacity to learn adaptive leadership, which is leadership that happens when you're not an expert, when you've never been here before, when when there are no best practices, when you have to learn and you got to let go of some of the stuff that brought you here, and you're going to have to enter into what we call uncharted territory. That leadership experience, everybody got thrown into.
Yeah.
So what happened to me and to most of our work is we went from traveling around the country talking to people to doing Zoom, both podcasts and webinars.
Yep.
And that meant we were having lots of conversations really quickly with a lot of leaders. Marcus, I did 170 Zoom webinars during the first 2 years of the podcast. And one of the things I always asked is, what are the challenges you're facing today? And this is the one that you and I decided we want to talk about.
Yeah.
The number one thing that almost everybody talked about that we realized was revealed during COVID and has been revealed in this disrupted world is what we would call a crisis of discipleship.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the discipleship practices that got us here were not helping us get through the pandemic and through the crises. Yeah. That in some senses, we weren't as Christian as we thought we were. And this has created a lot of soul searching and a lot of desire by leaders to ask, okay, so how do we need to lead differently to form the kinds of people who are ready for the kinds of crises the world seems to be facing all the time?
Yeah. I mean, that is a significant challenge. And we're, I see it in my congregation. So what's interesting for me is the way I experience it in this new congregation. I've been there for about 9 months now. I see pictures of, former classes of elders and deacons, and I'm like, I only recognize a couple of people, like people who were elders and deacons just before the pandemic, or maybe even into the early pandemic. I'm like, where are they? I think 1 or 2 of them have passed away, but I don't know who any of those people are. One of the things that you said to me, we were talking offline a few weeks ago, and you said that, since the pandemic, or that this pandemic, this may be the first time in history where people didn't come back to church, or the church didn't grow after a pandemic. You mentioned, there have been plagues and pandemics throughout history, and I guess a lot of time, or many of the times, or maybe every time, people were like, "Oh, we need to go back to church. We need to come back to God." But that hasn't happened this time. You shared that with me. Tell us more. Like, what are you hearing, or what are you noticing, or what have you seen? What does this tell us?
Well, one of the most interesting things is for most pastors, that crisis that you've experienced, where did all these people go, got turned into like an engagement question. How do
Yeah.
we do a better job of getting people back, reaching
Yeah.
out to them,
Yeah.
welcoming them back,
Right.
tidying up the sanctuary, getting the band
Yep.
back together,
Yep.
have a party. But when you talk to people about why they've slipped away,
Yeah.
it's ultimately the church didn't feel that different than the rest of the world.
Mm.
I
Yep.
don't miss it. I don't
Yep.
miss the community. And matter of fact, in my own life, I've begun to ask some deeper questions about what all this means.
Mm-hmm.
And what we recognized was um, that that's what I said before, is almost every crisis, the church has
Yeah.
grown. In the
Yeah.
first 400 years of the church,
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
300 years at least,
Yeah.
the church grew rapidly through the plagues of the day. The plagues and
Yeah.
crises of the day is when people sought out the church because
Yep.
they hungered for God,
Yep.
and they saw people who lived differently than the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth of the matter is, almost by every metric, the church mirrors the world around
Mm-hmm.
us, right down to the way that we have ended up polarizing around politics. For example,
Yep. Yep.
we're just as divided as the rest of our country,
Yep.
and we haven't demonstrated much difference.
Yeah.
And so, because of that, it's really caused people I know to have, many of the pastors that I work with and lead that we work with
Mm-hmm.
have said, I wonder if what we're doing is actually even having any fruit.
Right.
I had a pastor of an 8,000 member church say to me, after I saw the way my church members argued with each other publicly on Facebook,
Ugh.
I began to ask, have I wasted 31 years of my life?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a
Yeah.
pastor of an 8,000 member
Yeah.
megachurch with
Yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
campuses.
Yeah.
And he said, like, I watched their comments. Their comments were vile,
Ugh.
and the way they treated each other. And I wondered, have I wasted my life? And I do think
Yeah.
this is causing us to ask some questions about the kinds of
Mm-hmm.
spiritual formation and discipleship practices of the church
Yeah.
leading up to this day that have now
Yeah.
made us ask whether or not they've produced the
Yeah.
kinds of people that we're supposed to be.
Yeah. Um, so the next question then is what did we do wrong? And I don't
Mm.
I don't know if you know the answer, right? We're
Mm.
not a world of experts anymore, and so maybe we're still trying to figure out. But what did we do something wrong? Is there something we need to change?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer, but I have a couple
Mm-hmm.
of hunches,
Mm-hmm.
and my hunches come from talking to leaders everywhere about this.
Yeah.
Many churches confused discipleship with training people for church ministry.
Yeah.
So discipleship, which is really where we take
Right.
on the likeness of Christ,
Yeah.
where where we're grown to embody the presence of Christ in our neighborhood, where we
Yeah.
learn to grow in maturity, to be more like Christ.
Yeah.
Dallas Willard said that discipleship and spiritual practices are about you becoming who Jesus would be if he were you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which I love that phrase, because it's not you just becoming like Jesus. It's hard
Right.
for me to figure out how I'm going to be a first century Galilean
Right.
carpenter. But if Jesus was walking around in my skin, in my community, with my responsibilities,
Yep.
my family, my job, how would Jesus enter into it and make an impact?
Yep.
And that's a life transformation that is
Right.
more than just where I serve at church. Am I a Sunday school teacher, a small group
Yeah.
leader, an usher on the tech team? I
Right.
think we've confused institutional service with
Right.
spiritual formation.
Right.
And that's one hunch. I think that's been
Yep.
one problem. The other problem, I think, is that we've turned spiritual formation into the kinds of practices that are about my self, like I'd say my own self comfort,
Yeah.
my own sense of peace, my own. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
spiritual version of the Calm app.
Mm-hmm.
like there's nothing wrong with having spiritual practices that give us peace of
Yeah.
mind and help us be less stressed.
Yeah.
But those are not the end in and of itself. The end
Huh.
is transformation.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened is we've kind of taken either an overly institutionalized version of spiritual formation or an overly individualized version of
Mm-hmm.
spiritual formation.
Hmm.
And what I want to really argue about, and what we're really spending more of our time talking about, and I'm
Yeah.
working on a book on, is how do we develop the culture, the soil that actually
Yeah.
grows up the kind of fruit that will remain? Like,
Yeah.
how do we create the context
Yeah.
for of spiritual formation that actually creates the kinds of people
Yeah.
that the world will look to in times of
Yeah.
crisis, because we look more like the God who is reaching out to us.
Yeah. Boy, I mean, when I think about what you're saying here, that how do you create that kind of a culture and that kind of an environment? It seems to me that culture and environment might not look exactly like the way we've been doing church for the last, at least several hundred years, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think about a few folks in our church that I've gotten to know who love being a part of our church and are actually pretty new, but they're also involved in sort of a home community as
Mm-hmm.
their like a church, and it's very neighborhood based, maybe about 15 to 20 people, and they meet on Sunday afternoons. And when I look at them, I'm like, oh man, now these folks are living like Jesus because they've been involved in this very kind of well, it's non-institutional. It's all about inner life transformation and also neighborhood engagement. Um, and there's a part of me that wonders, is that a model? I don't know if it is. I'm just throwing this out there. But I see transformation in those. Do we need to let go of old ways of doing things and try new things in order to become the kind of church that I think the world needs us to be? Oh, what do you
Well,
think?
I think the answer to that is, of course, we're going to have to let go of some things, and of
Yeah.
course, we're going to have to try some new things.
Yeah.
I think more than anything, what we have to pay attention to is just humbly acknowledging that what got us here isn't going to take us
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like you said, I wonder if the model of the church over the last several hundred years is actually helpful. I would put it this way: there are multiple models of church throughout the world in lots of different contexts that are
Yeah.
really different. Home churches, like you've just said,
Uh-huh.
um, different congregations in different contexts that are really different and producing different kinds of folks. I think
Yep.
the issue for most of us is, especially in the West, has been the dominant mental model of church has either been like a local congregation that exists to be my little church. So kind of what I
Mm.
call it, like my little
Mm.
church. It's the place where me and my people come to get our own spiritual nurture.
Yeah. Right.
Or it's to be like a mega church, which means we have programs for everybody, and it's very
Right.
program
Right.
based. And what I
Right.
kind of wonder is if there's not so much a new model as a way of looking at both of those churches and saying there's a kind of transformation that comes by making the community intentional about its formation,
Mm-hmm.
like at the very
Mm.
center of our being.
Yeah.
So one of the examples that I use for this is there's an organizational model that I've been studying by two Harvard people named Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy,
Hmm.
and they talk about businesses that said, "Hey, we will hold a dual bottom line, a dual bottom line.
Hmm.
We will absolutely try to create the profits that we are called to do as a business, like
Mm-hmm.
produce the profits, and we're going to develop our people. We're going to be committed to the development of our
Mm.
people. We're going to do both." Well, all of a sudden, I think, a church could think of itself in the same way. We have a mission to be a witness in this community of Jesus Christ's presence in our midst,
Yeah.
and we're going to grow up our people to be more like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's intentional focus. What so happens, unfortunately, in so many of our churches is those two things, mission and formation,
Yeah.
become ancillary programs. Like they actually
Right.
become exterior programs. They're not the center of what we do. The center of
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
do is we have a big gathering on Sunday morning and we get people to
Right.
come here and
Right.
but what they're saying is the center of the church needs to be our mission and our formation.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
we are forming people, intentionally forming people for mission, we are actually taking on a different way of thinking about the organizational culture
Yeah.
that I think could show up in lots of different
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
sizes, constructs,
Yeah.
structures, denominations, ecclesiology. But the shift is to see that the primary work is for the
Mm.
community to be an intentionally formative community, so that
Yeah.
people take their place in the mission of God in the world. And we work on this in lots of places here at Fuller, including our
Yeah.
Center for Spiritual Formation. But I think that what we haven't done is paid attention to the kinds of leadership it's going to take to transform those churches
Yeah.
into this kind of intentionally formative community.
Yeah. I think the hardest part of that is I don't think we know how to be an intentionally formative community.
Yeah.
We know how to do our programs. We even know how to recruit volunteers, right? I remember going through my own personal pandemic several years ago and a toxic situation in a former church. And I came out of that and I really felt like, what did I do these last 7 years that I was here, or 8 years or whatever it was? And was anyone's life even transformed? And I got, for a while, I'm not opposed to having people volunteer for stuff, but I had this vile inner revulsion to like, oh, and then we just get volunteers, because there was this recognition that getting volunteers, and you already said this, is not the same thing as helping people be spiritually formed. So anyway, but I'm wrestling right now, right, with
Mm-hmm.
this idea. How do we get from being uh, how do we go from being churches that know how to do what we do, right? And we need ushers and we need greeters and we need we need youth leaders and children's ministry leaders, to we are a community of people who are being formed into the kind of people that Jesus would be if he were us, right? And I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm asking you questions that I know you're still wrestling with too, but I don't know. How can we at least take a
Well,
step toward that? Yeah.
well, here's the place where I start. I
Yeah.
start that Jesus said, I have appointed you that you would bear fruit, fruit that would remain. And this
Mm-hmm.
fruit, of course, in the scriptures is our grapes. It's what it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's grapes that becomes wine. And
Yeah.
the wine becomes the symbol of God's life and sacrifice and
Yeah.
love in the world.
Yeah.
So I always say the goal of every church is to produce great wine,
Mm.
wine that makes the world glad.
Mm.
And we produce that wine by producing people of great fruit.
Yeah.
And the fruit is the taste, the literal taste of Jesus, the taste of
Mm.
God.
Yeah.
It's what gives us genuine joy.
Yeah.
So then you ask the question, so how do you grow that great fruit? And
Right.
what most of us have done is spent a whole lot of time working on, manufacturing the grapes, selling the grapes, creating
Mm.
a market for the grapes. What we haven't come back to is the soil that it grows in.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
great grapes come from great soil.
Mm.
And what I want to do is ask the question, the soil, if the soil is our communal culture, what's the culture in the church that produces the fruit
Yeah.
that will make the world glad?
Yeah.
And when I talk to church leaders about this, they will literally say to me stuff like, I know Jesus said that we're supposed to care about the wine and not the wineskins,
Hmm.
which would be like today him saying, care about the wine and not the wine bottles.
Right.
I think I spent my whole life in the bottle manufacturing business.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've been creating wine labels and wine bottles and wine corks,
Right.
and I've forgotten how to grow grapes.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we need to be talking more about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we talk about adaptive shifts,
Yeah.
what we're talking about is having to acknowledge there isn't a program. There's not
Yeah.
a quick fix.
Yeah.
We're going to actually have to learn how to rebuild our soil, rebuild our organizational culture so they produce the fruit that then becomes the wine that makes the world glad. And this is going to require
Yeah.
us to let go of some things that we've
Yeah.
done
Yeah.
and to enter into some new ways of being, some new
Yeah.
practices, some new ways of being community together.
It seems that it will have to start with the leader. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, others, I suppose, could also start, but the pastor, the leader will have to have some kind of transformation as well. And so, what kinds of qualities or what kinds of transformation uh, will leaders need to experience? What qualities will they need to
Mm-hmm.
embrace in order to be that kind of a leader? Do you think?
Well, one of the parts is I think is in almost every place where we talk about a genuine adaptive change, it starts with being able to embrace the humility of not knowing,
Yeah.
of not having a plan or a program or a
Yeah.
quick fix. When we're anxious, we want a quick fix. We want a plan. We want a program. We want a
Mm-hmm.
7-point series. We want, oh my gosh, how can we transform the whole church during Lent? Right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
We're going to have to think much more long term.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to think about what brings health back into a soil. And what it requires is there needs to be and the capacity to start by acknowledging the things that don't work. So I always say that whenever I'm coaching, I say to people, whatever insight you get to that you need in your life, like I need to have more time to pray. I need to have I need to be in more environments where we can be authentic and honest and open about our learning, or whatever it would be.
Yeah.
The hard question isn't acknowledging that. It's, what will you take out?
Yeah.
What will you stop doing to do that? Because we want to keep the machine going.
Yep.
And instead of keeping the machine going and dabbling on the side with this formation thing, what would it require us to make that our primary purpose?
Yeah.
To pull out and stop the things that are not working, and instead start experimenting with new ways of being in the midst of it. And there are some beginning parts of that. Let me just say one thing you just said. If it's going to happen, it's going to start with a leader. What I want to say to the leader is, if we're going to transform our communities, it's going to start with you, and you cannot do it alone.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
If the very first thing you think is, I got to get myself all perfectly formed as a perfect little grape, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
The point is for you to bring people together and say, how do we reframe, how do we rework our soil so that it is healthy and produces lots of fruit, including in my life and yours?
Right. Right.
That alone. So I would say you can start with humility, and you can start with community, and you're starting on the same way. And I would say there's one more attribute that shows up a lot in all this literature, which is, it starts with the understanding that if I know I need to grow, the place I'm going to have to grow is going to be a places that's going to cause me discomfort, and it's going to require vulnerability.
Yeah.
So how do we create environments where we're literally able to identify, here's what God's doing in my life, here's what God's doing in our life, here's what we need to work on and grow in, and as we grow in this particular way, then that vulnerability is going to be part of the healthy soil that the fruit is growing out of.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. I was just thinking as you were talking about this particular conversation, and it's one where a lot of times I listen to podcasts and it's like, here are a bunch of answers for you, and here's how to do this or that, in whether it's church or business or whatever it is, but this is more like here are the things that we need to be thinking about kind of a conversation. Here are the things we need to be wrestling with. And, so my apologies to folks listening who are like, I didn't get any answers today. Well, we're with you.
It's kind of the point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is part of a journey, a long journey. And so as I say the word long, I want to mention something that I'm very excited about. And we're introducing something new to the podcast. Right now, the podcast comes out every other week. We're going to be adding not extra episodes, but episodes every week now. So on those off weeks, so to speak, we're going to do something called Quick Conversations for the Long Haul of Leadership, right? And so we're going to keep wrestling with the kinds of things that we started talking about today. And these episodes are going to be with me and Todd every time. So every other week, you'll get a short conversation, somewhere between 6 to 10 minutes or so. And we're just going to look at a single quote or a single question or a single a thought of some kind, just to continue the process of wrestling with what does it mean to be a leader in a world that is completely disruptive, just hard to navigate. So Todd, I'm excited to do this with you. What do you think?
Well, I think what's going to be great about it is that we'll be able to keep this kind of conversation going. And maybe in real time, we'll be modeling together how you and I are learning. Take a big question like just the crisis of discipleship and solve it in 20 minutes. We would be violating the trust of our people. But to raise that question and then invite other people into that conversation with us, that's going to be fun to do. And to do it regularly around some of these key concepts, I hope that'll be helpful for our folks.
Yeah. So we actually just recorded the first two of those quick conversations right before we recorded this one, and I think they're pretty good. So hopefully everyone else will think so as well. Anyway, very good. We're looking at quotes from Ronald Heifetz, Greg McEwen, and we have others on the way, Edwin Friedman, and Anyway, lots of good stuff, and hopefully something that will be really helpful for all of us as we wrestle with the challenges of ministry leadership in the 21st century. And the first one will be out the second week of January. I don't remember the exact date, but it'll be the second week of January. So I'm excited about that. Tod, thank you. This was
Thanks,
great.
Marcus.
I'm excited for all of these conversations to come, and yeah, just thanks for the good work that you're doing, leading us here at the Church Leadership Institute.
Well, I appreciate it. It's fun to work with you too, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much.
All right, good.